is the I Didn't Like the Ending podcast, and welcome to today's podcast, episode number 3. I have my good friend Lance here with me on the podcast. And Lance, are you single?
Yes, of course, for days. It's great.
Do you have any good Valentine's Day stories for our listeners?
I have none. The first Valentine's card I ever got was from a guy. That was lovely. His name was Michael Austin. Yeah, he was a lovely guy. First Valentine's Day
That is
ever got.
Thanks, Mike.
He's great. Bless his heart. He gave it to everybody. So I wasn't that. He was proposing his love for me, which I was a little disappointed at because he did a really good Smeagol impersonation from Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
I'm not going to try it, but he did great.
Well, whatever you end up doing this holiday, I hope that you enjoy yourself.
I will. Yes, ma'am.
Cool.
I'll be just drinking alone, probably. But we'll see. Depending on who's listening. It's the drink of your choice. I don't know.
Well, if you don't want to be alone this Valentine's Day, well, maybe put your number down in the comments and we can get Lance a date. This is going to turn into The Bachelor real fast.
Yeah. Do you like balding white men with no future? Call me, Lance Nelson. Nice to meet you.
Lance and I know each other from Virginia.
Yep. Back in the days.
Yeah.
It was a long, long time ago.
Wild.
On 3,000 miles away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Family's grip out there. Good
yeah,
times.
good times.
So, I got a question for you.
Yes, ma'am. I'm not always right, but I'm always confident.
What do you know about true crime? And, like, what's your interest?
Not a lot, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't know. I'm always fascinated by stuff, but it's... I don't know. Like, it seems like so many people love it to, like, kind of be aware of how to avoid stuff. And I normally am just like, oh, I don't like thinking about terrible murder and stuff. So I'll just not think about it at all, typically.
Yeah.
But it is good to be aware of things and, like I don't know. It's just crazy how criminal some people can get, like, so quickly. But then again, also some people are just bad people in the first place. I don't know.
In the first place.
It's a weird thing. I don't know. I'm excited to hear stories, though. I love story time. So this is going to be great.
Well, I've got a good story for you.
Let's hear it.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Well, today's sources are from murderpedia.org and wikipedia.org.
Oh, my favorite. Murderpedia.org.
Murderpedia.
I already messed it up. Don't mind me. We're not editing this out. We're just keeping this in.
This. Okay. Well, our case begins on the morning of the 15th of November.
Sorry, my brain just was like, do you want to know about murder? Use murderpedia.com.
There's a lot of useful information on there.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to know where to hide a body? Don't Google that. Don't. They'll know immediately.
They'll know. They absolutely will know. They will track you.
They'll be like, hey, this guy looked how to get rid of a body.
Yeah, so don't Google it. Just ask everybody.
Just ask everyone.
Ask everyone you know. Use
a friend. This is what you do. You go onto their computer and you Google how to get away with murder. It's a great TV show.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
I don't know if I've seen that.
It's fine. I'm just kidding. Viola Davis is amazing. Anyway, tell me about murder.
Well,
and true crime.
Yes, and true crime.
Other things of sad natures.
Yeah. Let's really bring the mood down. I have an interesting case for you today.
Yes, ma'am.
And you're the perfect person to tell it to.
I'm excited for this.
Yeah.
Tell me of your sad tales, woman.
Okay, will do. Okay, so our case begins on the morning of the 15th of November, and it's in Del Mar, New York. Peter Porco hadn't shown up for work, which wasn't like him at all.
Okay.
So in the past, if he wasn't going to show up for work, he would have phoned in. He was very reliable. When he didn't show up for work, his colleagues were worried about him, immediately decided to call the police.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why you should always be on time.
Yeah.
And, like, always be where you say you're going to be, because then people know, like, oh my gosh, if he doesn't show up, like, something's up.
He's dead.
He is
like, people,
something's
I
up.
wish I could say I was that punctual. I am not. People, like, yeah, I'm very late all the time for everything.
So he was on time.
Yeah.
So he had that going for him. So his
What
colleagues...
was his job, by the way? I'm sorry.
He was a judge.
Oh, wow.
He worked in the legal system.
Okay, so yeah, if he doesn't show up, something really is a problem.
Yes.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yes. So the police arrive at the scene.
Could I guess? The butler did it.
I'd no. No, that's a good guess though. Stereotypically, that would be it, right?
It's never the bottom.
So the police arrive at the scene and the front door is slightly open.
Okay.
And the front door key is still in the lock.
Okay.
The police enter the home and this is where they find the bloody body of Peter Porco at the bottom of his stairs.
Okay, so the door was left open.
Mm-hmm. And the body
his body
at the bottom of the stairs.
Man.
And the cops examined the body, and Peter's head was barely hanging on. Like it was almost completely severed off the body.
Boy.
The rest of the house was a horror scene. There was blood smeared on the carpet, smeared on the walls. The police make their way upstairs to see if there is anyone else in the house.
Okay.
This is where they come across another body, laying in a pool of their own blood. The police rushed over to the body and saw severe injuries to the head. The jaw was hanging off of their face, their eyeball had been split in two, and several of their teeth were missing.
That's terrible. That's horrible. Okay.
It is.
Boy.
It is, yeah. It's a tense moment.
Yeah.
Then the chest moved.
They're still alive.
A quick check of the pulse would confirm that Joan, Peter's wife, was still alive,
Boy.
but unconscious. When paramedics arrived and approached Joan weakly raised her hand as if she was asking for help.
Yeah.
The paramedics, working against the clock, realize they only have so much time to save Joan's life. The detectives at the scene understand the extent of her injuries and know things are not looking good for Joan.
No.
She's got her jaw like hanging off,
Yeah.
her eyes like split. They decide that it's probable that she won't make it, and they know that they need to try to get any kind of information they can out of Joan about who could possibly have done this to bring Joan and Peter to justice. Which, think about those last moments, like she's hanging on to life and they're trying to like get information out of her. That would be a really hard moment because you want to console them and you're also like, we need to know who did this to make sure that they don't do this to anyone else and to also bring you to justice. So the detectives start asking Joan questions and she is able to communicate through head nods and shakes.
Yeah.
First, they ask her if she can hear them. Joan nods yes. Next, they ask if a family member had done this to her. Again, Joan nods yes.
Boy.
She was then asked if her oldest son, Jonathan, had done this, to which she shook her head no.
Okay.
Finally, the detectives ask her if her younger son had done this, Christopher Porco. To this question, Joan nods yes.
Boy.
And
This
just
is why you don't trust the babies of the family.
oh, the
Sorry,
babies.
keep going.
And just
I have
like
a problem.
that,
I have to make jokes in order to light tension because I can't handle life apparently.
a lot of people
Sorry,
do.
keep going.
It's hard and it's a tense story. And just like that, Christopher Porco became the prime suspect. Joan was then rushed to the hospital where she was placed in a medically induced coma, and she had to undergo several operations on her face and skull.
No.
She completely lost her left eye.
But she did live?
She did live.
Okay.
Her right eye was damaged. She lost part of her skull as well, and miraculously, Joan survived the surgeries and lay in the hospital recovering.
Boy.
So while Joan is recovering, police set out to find Chris as soon as possible, and they didn't need to try very hard because Chris phoned them first.
Yeah. Okay.
Christopher Porco was born on the 9th of July, 1983. He grew up in Bethlehem, New York, where he lived with his parents, Joan and Peter Porco, and his older brother, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Now, growing up, Christopher's family had been described as a classic American family. His parents were in a happy, loving marriage. Both of his parents also had great careers. His dad worked in the legal field, and his mom worked as a children's speech pathologist.
Boy.
It's like cute, like really the
And that's
classic
so sad,
American
especially,
family.
like her jaw isn't so like the thing that she teaches people she can't do anymore.
I know.
Ugh.
The family was also heavily involved within the church, and Joan attended church daily.
Yeah.
Peter and Joan have been described as really great parents, loving, caring, wanting the best for their children, and they worked hard to provide the lifestyle that would provide for them. They had a nice home and lived in a nice neighborhood. Both the children were academically gifted and excelled in school and at sports. Christopher was charming, and he had a lot of friends. He was popular and always smiling. He had a good childhood and a good upbringing.
Yeah.
So it's not until Christopher leaves home and attends college that a darker side of him starts to emerge. So in the fall of 2001, he started his first semester at the University of Rochester. And once he got there, he decided that he could be anyone. So he started to lie about who he really was and where he came from to reinvent himself, which there's nothing wrong with trying to reinvent yourself or be a different person when you go in college. Like, develop yourself.
I get you.
But what he did was reinvent himself with lies to impress people.
Right.
So he told everyone that he was a jet-setting millionaire from a powerful and rich family. He told people that his family owned mansions all over the world in places like Vermont and Aruba.
Do you think he worked on like his white guy laugh type of thing?
Oh,
Like
what is the white guy laugh?
I feel like the rich white guy laugh is like you kind of laugh like a nutcracker, like.
He probably had it down.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'd imagine. It'd
Or
be
I
the
don't
first
know.
thing I would work on.
Yeah.
If I was saying that I was a millionaire.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this guy, it definitely gets out of hand with him.
Yeah.
He was part of a fraternity, and
Well, that's your problem. I'm kidding. I was homeschooled. I never went to college or anything like that. I know nothing of fraternities. So.
He was part of a fraternity, and he would gift so many presents for all his frat brothers.
Yeah.
And he was basically buying his social status.
Of course.
No one really questioned him because Christopher always seemed to have money on him, and he was willing to pay for everyone.
Yeah.
He was throwing parties and buying gifts, and he wasn't shy about it. He started to tell people that his grandmother was getting sick, and he was set to inherit $2.8 million from her as a gift.
Chump change.
Yeah, nothing.
Why would you even brag about
Pennies.
that? That's. I mean, most people be like, "Oh,
Menial.
I've been saving up my entire life." That's like a weekend in Vegas for some people.
Yeah.
I'm done. Don't listen to me. Keep going.
His family was comfortable, but they were by no means wealthy.
Yeah.
So where did this money come from? He continued to keep up this fake persona through his whole career at the University of Rochester. And another thing about Christopher is that his emotions were always unpredictable.
Yeah.
He was known as a heavy drinker and known to fly off the handle at any moment.
Okay.
He was constantly getting into fights, and he was argumentative. One time he threatened to kill a girl that was in one of his classes. Now, I don't know much more that was reported about this. He was reported, I do know that, but I don't know much more about the details on that, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Another time, he was in a fight at a party and was choking another student. And other students that saw had to drag Christopher off of the student he's choking to get him to stop. Like, he wouldn't stop if anyone else didn't intervene. And there were several people trying to get him to stop.
I'm going to just call it early. I don't like this Chris guy for multiple reasons.
You know, he just sounds really entitled so far.
Anyway.
Christopher didn't think that he needed to put much effort in to be successful.
Yeah.
That success would just come to him. He was gifted.
Well, I'm assuming he's a white man.
Yes.
So, yeah, of course he thinks that everything's owed to him. So why not?
Why not? Nice.
For those who are listening, I am also a white man, and therefore the world is entitled to me. Continue, please.
At least you're aware. That's all that it
Yeah,
takes,
but-
right?
but,
Awareness.
Hey, if I don't use it, then it feels worse.
Oh, dear.
Sorry, keep going.
He was gifted, but incredibly lazy, so his grades started to slip.
Yeah.
As he was trying to continue his lifestyle, but too lazy to work for it, he decided to steal.
Okay.
So that's where he's
You
getting his
gotta.
money.
Okay.
And he stole from,
Parents have a
parents.
sad, imagine, yeah.
yeah, his
Okay.
parents,
Yeah.
the very people that loved him.
Yeah.
One Thanksgiving, he was home from college, and right before he heads back to college from Thanksgiving break, he decided to stage a break-in at his parents' home and stole their personal computers
Yeah.
and sells them on eBay. Yeah. His parents reported the break-in, genuinely thinking that the break-in was real.
Yeah.
Nothing came of it because the police couldn't figure out what happened. And eventually, Joan and Peter replaced their personal computers. Well, a few months later, Christopher stages another break-in and steals the 2 brand new computers that they just bought and sells them again on eBay.
Okay.
So his
That's
parents...
terrible.
It is terrible. After there's this second break-in, his parents reported this a second time. And the police couldn't do anything about it again because they couldn't figure out what had happened.
Well, okay. I'm wondering if they were just like, hey, we kind of think we know what's happening, but we're not going to get the police involved because it's our kid. Or is it like they genuinely didn't know?
They genuinely didn't
Okay,
know
I
that
get
Christopher
you.
was behind it.
I'd imagine if you love someone so much, you can't even really conceive of them doing something really bad. And like,
Yes.
obviously, it led to much worse things than just being stolen computers and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry,
and you want to
continue.
believe the best in people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. His parents weren't his only targets.
Okay.
He worked part-time at a vet clinic and he staged a break-in there as well. He stole laptops, cameras, and cell phones, and then he sells all of this on eBay.
Okay.
Eventually realizing that only stealing these things still isn't providing the lifestyle that he claims
Well,
he
I mean,
has.
2.8 million is a lot. You know how much stuff you'd have to steal to get that much, and then how much like the broker from like trying to sell something would like take for you stealing something that's expensive in the first place. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
His whole plan is he's stupid.
It's a
I will
shame.
say that he's
You gotta
an
think
idiot
smarter,
and
Chris.
and a murderer as well. So
Yeah,
he's
he is.
I don't like this kid.
So he does start to scam more people so he starts listing items on eBay.
Yeah.
Like cameras and laptops and all of these things for sale.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't have them.
Yeah.
He starts listing what he doesn't have. So people start buying them. But when it comes time to send them, he obviously doesn't have the stuff.
Yeah.
And people start reporting him when they don't get their items.
Yeah.
And what Christopher does is he would pretend to be his brother, Jonathan,
Yep.
and reply back to these innocent people that he had scammed. And he would respond with, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but my brother Christopher is dead.
Yeah.
So there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Sorry." And then he just kept the money.
Ugh.
So in 2003, he's been in college for 2 years at this point.
Okay.
And he has failed a lot of classes, too many. And he gets kicked out of the University of Rochester. His parents, obviously unhappy about Christopher throwing his life away, tried to help him turn his life around at this point. And they made a plan as a family that Christopher would then go to Hudson Valley Community College and he would work for good grades and then transfer back to the University of Rochester. So how cute is that? They like come together as a family and they surround him. They're like, it's okay, like we're gonna make a plan, and there's still a way to get to this ultimate goal. So I think that like they really tried with him.
Yeah.
Christopher agrees to all of this, but he ends up skipping all of his classes still and doesn't put in any effort, and his grades continue to drop at the community college.
Yeah.
So in the spring of 2004, Christopher planned a vacation to England for spring break. He tells his parents that his grades were in good standing, which was a total lie.
Yeah.
While Chris is touring England for spring break and having a good time, back in the U.S., his parents were unfolding the truth about what was happening. They had just received a letter from the community college containing his actual grades.
Yeah.
At this point, Joan and Peter were proud of Chris turning things around, but when they got the letter showing the truth of his failing status, they were understandably furious.
Yeah.
And he's just off like gallivanting around England.
Yeah.
So they weren't mad that he was failing. They were mad
That he lied.
that he lied to them again and
Yeah.
kept them in the dark about his education. And it felt like such a waste of his potential. So at this time, Christopher's dad emails Christopher, who is still on vacation, And he writes in the subject line of the email, failing grades. You did it again. Busted. And in the body, the email read, you just left. We can't believe our eyes. I'm looking at your midterm grade report and it's all F, F, F.
Yeah.
How could you lie to us like you did? Explain yourself, Mom and Dad. In response, instead of telling the truth.
Of course. Hey, like, you know what the secret is? To just lie. Lie more.
Lie your ass off.
Just keep going.
Because nothing bad can happen when you
Of
lie.
course. Nothing,
I personally,
ever.
like, I try to be as honest as possible. And, like, I'm human. I've told lies before.
Yeah.
But I still just don't understand how people can continue to lie and build upon those lies. Because you can't, like, how do you keep it straight?
Yeah.
Like, I just don't understand how people can keep it up. It's so wild to me. Lying, I just don't understand.
Have you
lying.
ever had those friends that lie about everything? Like, in
Well,
the
I
sense
wouldn't
of,
know.
of pathological liars, like in the sense of like, it becomes like I'm stealing this bit from somebody, but like it kind of becomes a build your own adventure type of thing, where they're just like, oh, like I just start feeding them stories where you're like, oh, I heard you went fishing this weekend. They're like, yeah, I did. I'm like, oh, how many fish you catch? They're like 60. I was like, 60, that's incredible. Like, how long were you out there? An hour. You caught a fish a minute.
You caught
That
a
is
fish
incredible. What type of bait you use? I didn't use bait. I used my bare hands. Just swatted them out of the water. You're like, all right.
Were you talking to Chuck Norris?
I feel
That
like
is the only person who'd be able to do that, I feel.
Nah, probably. Good old Chuck.
He'd be telling the truth.
He'd be telling the truth. I like, Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the world down.
Yeah. Fantastic man.
He is.
He's an angel.
God bless you, Chuck
An
Norris.
Adonis.
All right, tell me how you really feel. All right,
Yeah.
Chuck.
Hey.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just always, just because I try to tell the truth, I just assume everyone else is telling the truth and being honest with me. But I just forget that, like, a lot of people lie. I don't know.
Yeah. Mark Twain once said that a man that always told the truth never has to remember anything, type of thing. Because with lying, you have to remember, be like, all right, I told them this, so that means I have to continue to tell them this and stuff. So just be honest with people.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's exactly why I'm honest, because I'm like, my memory sometimes fails me, and like, why anyways.
I get you.
Yeah, I like that quote from Mark Twain. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So instead of telling the truth, Christopher tells his parents that, hey, there's a mix-up in the system.
Yeah.
And don't worry, he really got A's and B's. And he says, I'll prove it to you when I get home. It's all just a complete misunderstanding. So when he gets back from England, he forges his community college report card and gives it to his parents.
Of course he does.
And his parents believe him. The next part is so wild to me. Chris then takes that forged grade sheet from his community college. Well, from him, that's supposedly from the community college, that he worked so hard on, and he uses it to then reapply to the University of Rochester.
Okay, so the same place that's kicking him out.
Yeah.
Oh, and then he's just like, hey,
He's
this
like,
is
hey, I got
actually-
better
like,
grades.
Hey, my parents bought this. You guys will buy it.
Yeah, and the university let him back in based on that false forged report card. Like, they didn't check, like double check or anything. They're just like, okay, this looks legitimate. Just a little scrap of paper.
Just a little scrap of paper. Why not go back? Sure.
Yeah.
Welcome
Rochester.
to college. Is it a university or is it a community college?
It's a university.
It's a university. Okay, I was thinking it was a
Yeah.
community college for a second. Like,
I mean, either way.
hey, either way, like,
Who- was it just like an intern that slipped that by?
I guess.
I
Let's
don't know.
see the mascot. I want to know what they are. They're the Yellow Jackets.
They're the Yellow Jackets.
Go Yellow Jackets.
Go Yellow Jackets. All right, Rochester. Okay, so now it's fall semester 2004, and Chris is back in the University of Rochester.
Go ahead.
Peter and Joan are so proud of their son, who's been able to get back into the university because he worked so hard.
Yeah, well, you know how hard it is to forge things? It's actually incredibly simple.
I've seen Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
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 Chris approaches his dad at the beginning of the semester for some financial help. He needs help paying for his books.
Yeah.
So he asks his dad for a loan of $2,000. And Peter sweet father that he is, he doesn't even bat an eye and co-signs on a loan with him.
Yeah.
Christopher also needed help paying off his student fees, and instead of asking his parents for help with that, he just takes his dad's financial information from the small previous loan and he forges his dad's signature on a second larger loan. And this loan would be for the sum of $31,000.
Anyway.
So he immediately uses this to pay off his tuition fees.
Yeah.
And then he takes out a second
Yeah.
secret loan
Yeah.
for $16,000.
I feel like you'd have to get that notarized and stuff, like do it in front of a notary, like not just like, oh, my dad signed this, so could I get $32,000, please?
Yeah. Like, who are these people in... all right, I'm just going to leave that one alone because it's not their fault. It is Chris's fault.
Yeah.
And so this second secret loan was for $16,000.
Okay.
And he goes out and he buys himself a brand new bright yellow Jeep Wrangler.
Go Yellow Jackets.
Yellow Jackets.
Gotta
School
stick
spirit.
with the alma mater, as it were.
Chris, side note, had a gambling addiction.
Of course he did.
And he had about 40 grand in gambling debt on top of all of this other debt. He just secretly co-signed with his dad.
Paying off the debt that he had with the new money that he got. He's like, let it ride.
Let it ride.
Yeah.
YOLO, I guess.
I guess.
So this totals up to be almost $50,000 in loans alone, and then the gambling debt on top of that. So this boy is just going crazy.
Just a wee bit.
So in November of 2004, Peter runs a credit check.
Okay.
And he was expecting to see the $2,000 loan that he co-signed with his son. And imagine his shock when he saw the $31,000 and $16,000 loan.
Yeah.
When he found out about these loans, he was understandably upset. He sends an email to Chris asking about the loans and telling him that he needs to pay the money back right away.
Yeah.
Included in the email was Peter telling Chris that if he did not pay the money back, that he would be forced to take legal action against him, his own son.
Yeah.
Chris ignores the email. He's like, whatever. Then Joan takes a turn sending an email to Chris. She tells him, we are concerned, angry, and disappointed, but we just want what's best for you.
Yeah.
We're really worried about your mental state. She reiterates how much they love him and will always love him, and that they just want him home as soon as possible. Chris also ignores this email. And on the 14th of November, 2004, and at 10:36 p.m., Christopher was seen leaving his college campus in his bright yellow Jeep Wrangler. He then traveled the 200-mile journey from the University of Rochester to his parents' home in Bethlehem, where he arrived in the early hours of the morning on the 15th of November. Chris then parked his Jeep on the driveway of his parents' home. He crept inside his parents' home using his key and disabled the alarm system. So at this time, because it's a couple of hours, it's like between midnight and 2 o'clock at this time that he's just like creeping inside his parents' house. So he disabled the alarm system. And once inside, Chris makes his way to the garage to find what he was looking for, the family axe. Once he had the axe, he slowly made his way to his parents' bedroom upstairs. He stood at his parents' bed, watching them sleep, and finally struck the first blow onto his father. Chris swung down the axe on his dad's head. He chopped at his dad a total number of 16 times, cracking his skull, penetrating his brain, and taking off part of his jaw. 16 times with an axe on the head. That is horrific.
No.
Next.
That's some Patrick Bateman American Psycho type stuff
Yeah,
right there.
he goes ham.
Yeah.
Next, Chris turned to his mother. Joan had woken up in the middle of the attack on Peter. Like, how could you not?
Yeah. Yeah.
And instinctively, she put her arms out trying to defend herself, and Chris proceeded to swing the axe down on her. He struck her multiple times in the arms and hands as she tried to fight him off before brutally striking her 3 times in the head, and she lost consciousness. By the end of the attack, one of her eyes had been split in half, and the side of her jaw was hanging from her face. Following this brutal attack, Chris was confident that both his parents were dead, and he walked out of the bedroom, went downstairs, and then he attempts to stage a break-in. He smashes the keypad on the alarm system. He then goes outside and cuts the phone lines. He smashed a hole in the garage window. And after he was satisfied with how he staged the break-in, he got in his bright yellow Jeep Wrangler and drove off back to the University of Rochester. It's awful.
It's terrible.
It's so awful. Like, the nerve.
Yeah.
And this now brings us to when I first introduced this case on the morning of the 15th of November. Peter's morning alarm was going off to get him up to go to work. After being struck 16 times in the head in a gruesome attack which broke his skull and penetrated his brain, Peter was still alive and conscious. So on that morning, his alarm goes off on his bedside table and Peter gets up. He climbs out of bed, he turns off his alarm clock, and he goes about his morning routine. Where Peter has sustained injuries and the damage to his brain, because he was hacked 16 times, the damage was only to the top part of his brain.
Yeah.
So how this works is this top part controls thoughts and reasoning,
Yeah.
but the bottom part, which was not damaged, this bottom part controls primal instincts and well-formed habits.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't damaged at all. So at this point, Peter is literally operating on autopilot.
Yeah.
So has no reasoning, doesn't really have thoughts about anything, but he's just going off of instinct and routine.
Yeah.
And so he's operating on this autopilot almost like a zombie. So Peter manages to get himself up out of bed, and he walked from his bedroom to the bathroom. He stood over the sink. He looks at himself in the mirror, and he's pouring blood everywhere. He's looking in the mirror, seeing that he's pouring blood, but his brain couldn't process what that meant. So instead, Peter acted on instinct, and he saw that there was blood in the sink, couldn't figure out that it was his own blood and that he was the one bleeding, that he was in pain. So he just started to grab tissues and clean up the blood, his own blood. Next, Peter made his way downstairs, leaving this trail of blood behind him. But again, he could see the blood, but couldn't really process what that meant. So instead, he just walked into the kitchen and went about his normal morning routine. So as if he was just getting up on any other day, getting ready for work, he carried out his morning routine. And there's evidence that he tried to load the dishwasher, that he wrote a check for Christopher. There's evidence that he tried to pack himself a lunch.
Yeah.
And he even goes outside.
Yeah.
He steps outside in this state through the front door to collect the newspaper. So when he goes out to collect the newspaper, the front door shuts behind him and locks him out. But Peter, operating on formed habit and routine and instinct, he knows that there's a spare key under the flower pot. So he goes and he grabs the spare key, opens the front door, and he lets himself back into the house. He starts to make his way back to the kitchen, but sadly at this point, Peter had suffered huge amounts of blood loss.
Yeah.
And before he could make it back to the kitchen, he collapsed at the bottom of the stairs. And this is when Peter lost his life. That's wild.
That is bananas.
Yeah. And all of this was pieced together by investigators later on.
Yeah.
It's crazy that they can analyze a scene like that and they can know that that's what was happening, and from the injuries and stuff, of course. But
Yeah. Wow.
yeah,
Talk about a creature of habit.
it's so crazy.
That is insane.
Yeah, just like looks at himself and he has no idea.
Yeah.
Like, can't really fathom like what's really going on. No reasoning.
Yeah.
So now back to Chris
Yeah.
on the morning of this event.
Yeah. Went back to University of Rochester. Go Yellow Jackets.
Go Yellow Jackets. He had just been indicated by his mother, and the cops
Yeah.
now saw him as their prime suspect.
Well, yeah.
Before they could call him, Chris called the police, like I said earlier. So Chris placed a 911 call where he says that he's been told that his parents have been murdered, and is this true?
Yeah.
And what he was saying was strange, cold, and really weird. Like, the phone call that, like, I listened to it, and he's really strange on it. He's like, hey, so
The balls
it was kind of
on this
like
kid.
yeah, it was kind of like nonchalant, almost like he's asking like for a pizza, or like, hey, do you have any like extra pizzas at this pizza place? Or I don't know, it just sounds so weird and cold and just strange. And so Chris is then taken to the station at this point after the phone call, and the cops start asking him questions about what happened. They were asking him where he was, and his behavior was strange, which we never know how someone's going to react when they're grieving.
Yeah.
Let's just put that out there. We also never know when how they're going to react when they're in shock. So I know that there's like space for that.
Yeah.
But he was just strange and cold and just weird, like bizarre behavior from this guy.
I mean, I'm not a
Like he was
therapist
off.
or a psychologist, but like this guy sounds like a sociopath. That
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, just no remorse, just like, oh, well, everything's entitled to me in the first place.
Yeah, very entitled. So Chris, during the whole interview, denies any involvement. He claimed he was with his frat brothers the whole night watching a movie. He said that they would be able to back up his story. But when the police went to question the frat brothers, they discovered no one remembers seeing Chris in the dorm. But this wasn't the only suspicious thing, because when they start to look into Christopher and where he could possibly have been, Chris's bright yellow Jeep, can't miss it, was seen on CCTV leaving the University of Rochester at 10:30 p.m. on the 14th of November. His Jeep was also picked up on CCTV heading towards his parents' house. 200 miles away. And on this route, you got to pass through a couple of toll booths, and people at the toll booths remember this bright yellow Jeep Wrangler, because it's not exactly a subtle car. Like, it's a pretty unique car, and so people remember it. They remember in the middle of the night this bright yellow Jeep Wrangler. The journey from the University of Rochester to his parents' house would take around 3.5 hours. So because Chris left the campus at 10:30 p.m., this would mean that he would arrive at his parents' house at 2 a.m. And it was confirmed by the security company that the Porco home alarm system was disabled at 2:14 a.m. So this timeline fits perfectly. And also, the bright yellow Jeep was spotted in the driveway at the Porco household in the early hours of the morning by a neighbor. So remember the phone lines that he cut trying to stage the break-in? It's confirmed that these phone lines were cut at 4:54 a.m., which is approximately 2 hours 45 minutes after he first entered the home, disabling the alarm system, which gave him plenty of opportunity to actually carry out this attack and then also possibly do some cleanup after. Like 2.5 hours is like, that's a good amount. That's like a solid amount of time. So Chris's Jeep was then spotted heading back to the University of Rochester at 5:14 a.m. He was spotted on CCTV arriving at campus at 8:30 a.m. And again here, the timeline just fits perfectly. So after Chris's Jeep was spotted on CCTV at 8:30, He was then spotted jogging around campus where he was seen by multiple people, kind of like, almost like he was trying to create an alibi, like making sure that a lot of people, he was like saying hi to everyone and making sure that people knew that he was on campus.
Yeah.
And the police were just like having none of this, because as far as the police were concerned, they were about to close the case.
Yeah.
Until this huge twist that they were not expecting, and this would change everything about the case.
Okay.
It would turn the case on its head. Joan, who had previously identified her son Chris as the attacker,
Yeah.
now she was in the hospital recovering from her surgeries, and she goes on record and reverses her statement.
Yeah.
She's now saying that Chris is completely innocent.
Okay.
So
Was this in writing, or was this like her actually saying it?
her saying it,
I get
yeah.
you.
Joan was claiming that she had no memory of the night of the attack, which makes total sense, right?
Yeah,
Given PTSD and
like,
stressful.
Also, just the brain damage alone, I'd imagine, from getting an axe to the head type of thing. Like,
Yeah.
And then also, like, I mean, just the thought of like your kid doing that to you, I'd imagine I'd want to block that out immediately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sorry, keep going.
Yeah, and she's not the only parent that seems to almost protect herself in that way whenever it comes to your kids. If your kid really did something bad, sometimes parents can turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
So Joan was claiming that she had no memory of the night of the attack, and what she did know, she stood by, is that Chris would never do something like this, and not to his father.
Yeah.
So Joan is very adamant about this. She gave a thorough interview to the police claiming that he is innocent, and she's also written letters to newspapers asking them to stop blaming her son and go after the real killer. So other family members actually did think that Christopher was responsible, including his older brother Jonathan.
Yeah.
The only one in the family who was sticking by Chris was just Joan.
Yeah.
So now it is very possible and plausible that she has no memory of the attack, and because of her injuries like we just discussed, Joan is not going to want to think that her son has done this to her.
Yeah.
And we don't know 100% that Chris is guilty. Pretty much all the evidence points towards Chris, but the trial still needs to happen. So the police decided to stick with Chris as their main suspect, and they were convinced that he did this.
Yeah.
So a couple of other suspects were looked into. It was discovered that Peter received a death threat just a few years prior to the attack.
Well, I was imagining when you first started the story that him being a judge, like I was like, oh, something bad could happen, but like I still feel like it's Chris. Keep going.
This came from when he was working as an appellate judge, and you know what appellate judge is?
No,
and
I
I
have no
think
idea.
that I'm saying it right. They're an appeals judge.
Okay.
And the man that was convicted in this case did not like the verdict, did not agree with him.
Gotcha.
And so that man sent Peter a death threat. So the police look into this, and they were able to track down this man, but he had a solid alibi.
Yeah.
Next, it was found that Peter's great uncle, Frank Porco, actually had solid ties to the mob. There were theories that Peter and Joan were targeted as a way of getting to Frank.
Yeah.
The uncle,
Yeah.
his name in the mob or whatever, he was known as Frank the Fireman.
Frank the Fireman.
Frank
Did he
the
always
Fireman.
kill people with axes?
And so that's the theory, is that because an axe was used in the attack, that it could be symbolic.
Yeah.
But this was ruled out as well.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, the other son, was also ruled out. He had a solid alibi. He was at a naval base. And literally the only person that could have done this, who had opportunity, he had motive, was Christopher. It took a year after the attack to arrest Christopher. It was a year after the attack to finally arrest him, and he was charged with the murder of his father and the attack on his mother. So following the arrest, he was released on bail set at $250,000.
Okay. Please tell me he didn't get it and got on bail.
Well, guess who paid for his bail?
Mom.
Yeah. So during this time, his mother also threw him a birthday party because he was turning 23 and she wanted to celebrate him. And there's even like video footage of the two of them like being filmed for this TV show.
Yeah.
And it's the most awkward exchange.
Yeah.
It's just like the most awkward exchange ever. And you can tell that like he's not really sincere, but he's like trying to be humble about it. It's incredibly uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
So, but Joan just like sticks by him. And so in June 2006, Chris went to trial.
Yeah.
And his mother sticks by him the whole time.
Yeah.
She was there every day with her son in the courtroom. And so what was found out is that his parents were worth probably like $60,000 alive, but Chris was set to receive $1.1 million in insurance if he had successfully murdered his parents. So the defense pointed out that there is no physical evidence to say Chris did this.
Yeah.
All the evidence that the prosecution had was circumstantial, and what the defense was saying is there's no blood found on Christopher or in his Jeep. They didn't find a trace anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, they searched high and low. And the defense said with an attack that was so aggressive with an axe, there would have been some tiny speck of blood on Christopher or in his Jeep. And the prosecution, so Chris was in the house for a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, 2.5 hours to
2.5 hours.
frame up everything. I'd imagine you use that to clean up yourself.
Yeah. That was plenty of time to carry out the attack, clean it up, and also Chris worked at the vet office. And so he learned how to clean up blood by working at the vet clinic.
Oh, okay.
And so Christopher is also at home. He would have had a change of clothes there. And so the defense for Christopher also tries to say that there is another killer. There was someone else responsible because they said, you know, how the phone lines were cut?
Yeah.
Outside, they found a single fingerprint by the phone lines that were cut. And this fingerprint did not match Chris. It did not match anyone else in the house. And they actually couldn't identify who this fingerprint belonged to, but the defense was adamant that this fingerprint belongs to the killer. Like, this one tiny little fingerprint outside belongs to the killer. And that was pretty much all that they had to be like, I don't know. And here's the thing. They did a good job of casting doubt. Like, well, there was another fingerprint that was found.
This is why I'd be a terrible juror, because if they're like, hey, it is the job of the prosecutor to show without a shadow of a doubt that this person is guilty of something. If someone came up, I'd be like, yeah, I think that guy's guilty. And they're like, there's no evidence that man is guilty. I'm like, yeah, look at his face. He did it. I'd be a terrible juror. That's all I'm trying to say. I'd immediately look at someone and just judge them right off and be like, yeah, I think that guy did it.
That's the tough thing too. And then also, like, there are certain things that you can and can't do as a juror. And I would want to run my own tests, but you can't run your own tests outside of the jury.
Yeah.
Because that would be a mistrial. In the end, the jury agrees with the prosecution.
Okay.
They thought the evidence was too compelling.
Yeah.
Christopher Porco was found guilty of second-degree murder and attempted murder and was given 50 years in prison for each charge. And to this day, Christopher maintains his innocence.
Well, I'd imagine. Yeah, like, he hasn't been the most honest of people yet. Why start now? I'm sorry. What?
Yeah,
Oh, are you not a fan of this thing called justice?
Yeah. As far as the jury is concerned, they still were able to make this decision based on the evidence that was too compelling, even without the mother's previous statement. Either there's a lot of audacity and entitlement on behalf of Christopher.
Yeah.
And that kind of matches this narcissistic, grandiose personality.
Yeah.
Or Like, what if he really was innocent and it was just like...
I mean, from everything you told me makes me think that he is guilty, but like, I mean, I guess there is a possibility. I can understand where someone that you really care about, you want to protect them, and you want to, like, she already lost a husband, and I'm talking about Joan. Like, she already lost a husband, she doesn't want to lose another kid type of thing. So I could see where part of it could be like, oh, well, like, yeah, even if he did this, I'm not losing somebody else that I care for type of thing. I hate people. That's all I'm learning from this. People are bad.
Joan is entitled to still be loyal to whoever she wants to be loyal to. You know, she gets to make that decision, and she's the one that was wronged here, her and her husband. And so I do want to, like, take up for Joan, because she does have that right to, like, still say those things. And also, is the truth too painful? Let's talk about Peter. Peter Porco was described as a loving father and husband.
Well, he sounds like a great guy.
And he would go out of his way to help anyone, especially his sons, Jonathan and Christopher. Yeah. He had a long, distinguished career in the legal field, and he was especially proud of his work, representing the interest of children. He was an active church member. He was a kid sports coach and a very active member in his local community. He will be missed by so many. He was only 52 years old. And Joan Porco miraculously survived this attack. She has suffered life-changing injuries, and not much is known about Joan today. Yeah. However, it is thought she still sticks by her son Christopher. That was the story of the murder of Peter Porco and the severe wounding and disfigurement of Peter's wife, Joan Porco. How did you like the ending?
I hated it. I mean, I like the part where he got in prison.
It's like unsettling.
Makes you feel weird. Yeah, I hated it. I didn't like it.
Since I've been in the true crime community, realizing that, like, by sharing these stories, I think that's what it is for me, is knowing that, like, we're not alone, and that, you know, we can share the stories of these victims and the stories of kind of what happens in these situations, learn from them, and try to be a voice for people, you know, that are going through something hard. So, Lance, I know you have a podcast. Do you want to talk about your podcast?
My podcast is called Sensible Mischief. It is not about true crime. It's more of just me asking people, like, how they try and get outside themselves and live life to the fullest. Quick synopsis is, there was a guy I met in New Zealand who was the coolest old guy I've ever met in my life, and he talked about, like, when he was a kid, his dad was in charge of the Royal Air Force during World War II, like the head engineer of the entire Royal Air Force. And so he's like, when I was a kid, I grew up in Egypt. We used to climb the pyramids for fun, me and my siblings. We used to steal stuff from guards, and they'd take off their bayonets and whip us in the back when they catch us. And he's like, I still have scars from that.
Oh my.
He talks about, like, how his dad was such a high-ranking officer and a staunch Roman Catholic that the Pope ate at his house once. And he's like, I don't remember this, but I told the Pope he looked like a bunny with his hat on.
Are you serious?
And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And he goes off for 2 hours about all these amazing things he's done in his life. And then at the end of it, he's just like, guys, when you get to my age, the only thing you have left is the stories that you can tell. So live life to the fullest, never turn down a challenge, and always get into sensible mischief. And I fell in love with that. So now I just ask people how to, like, what they've done with their life to kind of, like, instead of living in their own little box, to kind of expound and grow as people and stuff. So, like, yeah, it's nothing like what we talked about today. So yeah, but thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Lance is great, and I'm so glad that he's on the podcast today. Definitely check out his podcast, Sensible Mischief. I'll make sure to link it in the show notes, so if you'd like to listen to Lance's podcast and go give him a follow, that would be great.
I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of I Didn't Like the Ending. Please like and subscribe. Everything really helps, and thank you so much for your viewership. It's been just really great sharing these stories. So if you have any case suggestions, you can follow the link, or you can comment below, and then any thoughts, opinions, and do you think that Christopher did it? And we will see you next time on I Didn't Like the Ending. Bye.
Bye.